I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office building when I tore open the heavy manila envelope. The official seal of the family court stared back at me. I read the legal jargon once, then twice, my vision blurring with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. Parental alienation. That was the charge. My sister Chloe, the woman who had vanished into thin air 12 years ago, was taking me to court. She claimed I had brainwashed her children against her. She was demanding supervised visitation and, for the youngest who was still a minor, joint custody. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. 12 years of silence, 12 years of sweat, tears, and absolute devotion. And she thought she could just waltz back in and rewrite history with a piece of paper. To understand the audacity of this lawsuit, you have to understand who Chloe was. Growing up, she was the princess of our house. She was the beautiful, charismatic hurricane that my parents revolved around. They never told her no. I was the quiet one, the responsible sister who got straight A grades and stayed out of trouble. Chloe lived on pure impulse. By the time she was 23, she had given birth to 3 children from 3 different men. None of the fathers stuck around. I never judged her for that because life is messy and mistakes happen. But I did judge her for what came next. It was a Tuesday night, just past 11 o'clock. The rain was hitting my apartment windows hard when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Chloe standing there, soaked, with 3 exhausted children trailing behind her. Maya was 7, Liam was 5, and baby Hazel was still in diapers. At Chloe's feet were 2 black garbage bags filled with their clothes. I will never forget the look on her face that night. It was not panic, it was a terrifying, cold determination. She stepped inside and dropped the bomb. She had met a guy named Derek. He had a new job waiting in Arizona, and he wanted her to come with him. But there was a catch. Derek did not want baggage. He did not want kids. Chloe looked me dead in the eye and said she was choosing him. She asked me to watch them just for a few months until she got settled. She promised she would send money. She promised she would call every single week. I asked her if she was out of her mind. I was 26 years old, single, working as a low-level administrative assistant, and barely making my own rent. How was I supposed to feed 3 extra mouths? She did not answer my question. Instead, she knelt down to say goodbye to the kids. That was when I saw it. Maya had spent 3 days making a braided friendship bracelet for her mother out of colorful yarn. It was clumsy and frayed, but Chloe had sworn she would never take it off. Right there, in my narrow hallway, Chloe unclasped the bracelet. She muttered something about Derek not liking cheap jewelry, slipped it off her wrist, and placed it on the entryway table. She did not even look at Maya's face when she did it. She kissed each of them on the forehead, told them to be good for their aunt, and walked out the door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking shut felt like a gunshot. Maya did not cry. She just stood there, staring at the closed door, waiting for it to open again. Liam tugged at my shirt and asked if they were having a sleepover. Hazel was asleep in my arms, completely unaware that her universe had just shattered. That first night, I tucked all 3 of them into my small bed. I lay on the hard wooden floor right next to them, listening to their breathing, terrified of the morning. I had no money, no plan, and no idea how to be a mother. But as I stared at the ceiling in the dark, I knew my old life was over. The first month was a living nightmare built entirely on false hope. I woke up every morning expecting the phone to ring. I checked the mail every afternoon looking for the check Chloe had promised. But the mailbox was empty, and the phone stayed silent. The brutal reality of raising 3 kids overnight hit me like a freight train. Liam needed new shoes because his toes were curling in his old sneakers. Maya had developed a nervous cough that would not go away, and I had to figure out how to get her to a free clinic without any health insurance. Hazel cried for hours every night, confused by the unfamiliar walls and the sudden absence of her mother. I eventually heard through a mutual cousin that Chloe and Derek were living in a luxury apartment complex in Scottsdale. My cousin showed me the photos. Chloe was posting pictures of pool parties and expensive cocktails on social media. She was living a carefree second youth. There was not a single mention of the three children she had abandoned in my living room. My own life, meanwhile, was unraveling at record speed. At the time, I had been dating a guy named Mark for about 6 months. He was fun, handsome, and completely unprepared for reality. When he came over that first weekend and saw my tiny living room covered in coloring books and a crying toddler, the blood drained from his face. We stood in the kitchen, and he flat out told me he could not do this. He said he signed up for a girlfriend, not an instant family. I did not scream. I did not beg him to stay. I just opened the front door and watched him walk away. That was my first brutal lesson in how quickly people will run when the burden gets too heavy. But the ultimate betrayal came from our own blood. Desperate and terrified, I packed the kids into my beat up sedan and drove to my parents' house. These were their grandparents. Surely they would step in. When I arrived, the house smelled of fresh coffee and expensive candles. My mother was in the living room cheerfully organizing travel brochures for a luxury cruise to the Bahamas. I stood there with Hazel on my hip, dark circles under my eyes, and begged them for help. I told them I was drowning, that my paycheck barely covered my rent, let alone formula, winter coats, and school supplies. My mother refused to even meet my eyes. She sighed, smoothing out a glossy brochure, and said she had already done her time raising kids. She claimed her nerves were too fragile to start over. My father paced the room, avoiding looking at the children. He told me Chloe was just acting out and would come to her senses eventually. Then he reached into his leather wallet and handed me $200. $200 for three growing children, for an indefinite amount of time. They went back to discussing their vacation itinerary, and I walked out of my childhood home feeling colder than I ever had in my entire life. I drove us back to my cramped apartment in complete silence. Maya was sitting in the back seat, staring out the window with that same quiet intensity she had the night her mother left. She knew. Even at 7 years old, she understood the rejection. She knew nobody was coming to save us. That night, after I managed to put them all to bed, I sat on the cracked linoleum floor of my kitchen. I stared at the two crisp $100 bills my father had given me. It was an insult, a pathetic buyout for their own guilt. But as I sat there in the dark, listening to the soft breathing of the three children sleeping in the next room, something profound shifted inside me. The fear and the self-pity completely evaporated. In its place, a fierce, unbreakable armor started to build around my heart. I realized that expecting help from people who had already decided not to give it was a toxic waste of my energy. My sister was a selfish ghost. My parents were cowards. Mark was just a tourist in my life. There was no cavalry coming over the hill. There was only me. I placed my hand flat against the cold kitchen floor and made a silent vow. From that second forward, I would stop looking at the door, hoping someone would walk through it to rescue us. I would become the rescue. I would be the fortress between these children and the world that had thrown them away. I would never let them feel like a burden ever again. The very next morning, I woke up before the sun. I stopped waiting for a miracle, and I went to war. My war started the very next morning. I walked into my boss office and demanded more responsibilities to earn overtime. When that was not enough, I hunted down a second job. I spent my Saturday mornings doing mind-numbing data entry at a drafty logistics warehouse on the edge of town. It did not pay much, but every single cent went into a secret emergency fund. I had learned the hard way that living without a financial buffer was like walking a tightrope without a net. To make the weekend job work, I had to get creative. I struck a deal with Mrs. Ortega, a retired widow who lived on the floor below us. We made a silent, unwritten pact. Every Thursday evening, I did all her heavy grocery shopping and carried the bags up the stairs for her. In exchange, she watched the kids for 4 hours on Saturdays. There were no grand promises or signed contracts, just two people solving a concrete problem to survive. The kids noticed the shift in our routine immediately. Liam, being 5 and full of endless energy, interrogated me every time I picked up my purse. I remember putting on my coat one Saturday morning and he stood in the hallway, blocking my path. He asked why I had to go to work again when I had just gone yesterday. I told him because there is work yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He thought about that for a second, his little brow furrowed. He asked if I had to work on Sunday. I told him Sunday was our day to rest. He nodded slowly, satisfied, before yelling from down the hall, "But Monday you work again, right?" He was learning the relentless rhythm of our new reality. Hazel, on the other hand, never asked questions. She just shadowed me. Everywhere I went, the toddler followed. If I sat on the floor to fold laundry, she sat right next to me, aggressively crumpling socks with intense dedication. If I opened the refrigerator, her little head would pop up right under my elbow, staring into the bright light as if we were making a critical life choice together. Then came a Tuesday evening that changed everything. I was standing at the sink washing dishes, exhausted to my bones. I heard her tiny 2-year-old voice from the floor behind me. "Mom, look." I froze. The water kept running over my hands. I turned around slowly, holding my breath. Hazel was sitting on the linoleum, holding up a bright yellow plastic building block. She was looking right at me. "It is very pretty," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Then I turned back to the sink. I did not correct her. I did not explain the complicated family tree or tell her I was just her aunt. I just kept washing the dishes while my heart did a violent, strange flip inside my chest. In that quiet kitchen, surrounded by soap suds and cheap plastic toys, she had chosen me. But I knew that love and hard work were not enough to protect them. I needed legal authority. 6 months after Chloe vanished, I walked into the family court for the first time to file for temporary guardianship. I did not have a lawyer. I had spent nights reading legal forums on the internet. All my ammunition was inside a clear plastic folder I bought for 99 cents at a corner store. Inside were medical bills with my name as the guarantor, school registration forms listing my address, and a meticulous handwritten log of every single expense. The court clerk looked at me over her glasses, clearly exhausted by the endless line of desperate people. She asked for my legal representation. I told her I had none. She asked for the biological mother. I told her she was in Arizona, unreachable, and had abandoned the children. The clerk sighed and asked if I had any documentation of the abandonment. I slid the 99-cent folder across the heavy wooden counter. She opened it. She flipped through the pages in absolute silence for 2 long minutes. Then, her expression softened just a fraction. She handed me a thick stack of forms and pointed toward the waiting area. It took me 2 hours to fill out those papers, using a pen I had to borrow from a stranger. The legal process took 11 agonizing months of delayed hearings and bureaucratic red tape. But I learned how to play the game. I learned to wear my only good suit, arrive early, keep my mouth shut, and document absolutely everything. When the thick envelope finally arrived in the mail, granting me temporary legal guardianship, I did not celebrate. I stood in my hallway, wearing my winter coat, and filed the document into my folder. I had built the first solid wall of our fortress. But walls require constant defense, and I had no idea how massive the storm brewing on the horizon would be. People always say time flies when you are raising kids. That is a comforting lie told by people who have not been through the trenches. Time did not fly for us. Every single year had its own heavy weight. Every year brought a new set of concrete problems to solve, expenses to cover, and nights where I stayed awake doing mental math to see if my bank account could stretch until Friday. But struggle breeds transformation. At work, I stopped being the quiet girl in the corner. By the time the kids were firmly settled in grade school, I had been promoted to operations manager. I did not get that promotion by asking nicely. I walked into the office of my boss with a thick binder proving my exact value to the company, and I demanded it. The extra money did not make us rich, but it stabilized us. I finally quit my weekend job. I started sleeping through the night. As the years passed, the children grew into their own distinct personalities, each carrying the invisible scar of abandonment in a different way. Hazel grew up to be terrifyingly brilliant. She processed the world differently than the rest of us. She was the quiet observer. By the time she was 8, she was reading thick novels meant for high schoolers. She never asked for attention. We had a silent agreement where I would leave a new book on her nightstand, and she would simply read it. Maya, on the other hand, became the protector. She kept her circle of friends small, her grades perfect, and her emotions heavily guarded. She never asked for anything expensive because she still remembered what it was like to arrive with nothing but a garbage bag. And then there was Liam. Liam was the volcano. The anger of being discarded by his own mother had festered deep inside him, and when he hit puberty, it finally erupted. When he turned 14, the calls from his school started. He was acting out, talking back to teachers, and picking fights. The climax happened on a freezing November afternoon. I got a call from the middle school principal. Liam had gotten into a brutal fistfight in the locker room. When I arrived, he was sitting in the office with a bruised jaw and knuckles covered in dried blood. Another boy had made a cruel, passing joke about Liam being an orphan whose real mother did not even want him. Liam had snapped. The drive home was suffocatingly silent. When we got inside the apartment, I set my keys on the counter and told him he was grounded for a month and suspended from his beloved soccer team for a week. He exploded. He grabbed his heavy winter coat, hurled it across the living room, and screamed at the top of his lungs, "You cannot tell me what to do. You are not my real mother." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I let the echo of his teenage rage fade into the walls of the apartment. I stood completely still, looking him dead in the eye. "You are absolutely right," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am not your mother, but I am the one standing right here. I am the one who pays for this roof, who cooks your dinner, and who will not let you throw your future away just because you are hurting. As long as you breathe the air in this house, my rules are the only ones that matter. Do you understand me?" He stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes welling up with furious tears. Then he spun around, stormed into his bedroom, and slammed the door so hard the framed pictures in the hallway rattled. He did not speak to me for 2 whole days. On the third evening, I was standing at the stove stirring a pot of soup. Liam walked into the kitchen. He stood next to me for a long time, staring down at the floor. "I am sorry," he mumbled, his voice thick. "What I said was wrong." I looked at him. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. He was trying so hard to be a tough man while still hurting like a broken little boy. "I know," I said softly. "It is already forgotten." He stood there for another second. Then, without me asking, he reached into the cabinet, pulled out the plates, and started setting the table for dinner. We never had that argument ever again. I channeled his overflowing aggression into sports. I worked extra shifts to pay for him to join an elite competitive soccer league. I showed up to every single game, standing on the sidelines in the freezing rain and the blistering heat. I became the loudest, proudest voice in the bleachers. Slowly, the defensive anger left his eyes, replaced by a fierce, unspoken loyalty to our little family. I really thought we had reached safe harbor. I thought the hardest days were firmly behind us. But I was wrong. 1,000 miles away in Arizona, a ghost was packing her bags, getting ready to blow our entire lives apart all over again. Fan, 12 years. That is how long the silence lasted. 12 years of me building a secure life for these kids out of sheer willpower, while Chloe existed only as an uncomfortable memory. Maya was 19 and working her first job at a local bookstore. Liam was 17 and the star captain of his varsity soccer team. Hazel was 14 and already touring college campuses for early admission. We were safe. We were happy. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, my cell phone rang. It was an Arizona area code. I knew immediately. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I answered. "It is me," a voice said. It was Chloe. But the arrogance was completely gone. Her voice was thin, fragile, and dripping with desperation. Derek had left her. She had lost her waitressing job. She was about to be evicted. And suddenly, after 12 years of total amnesia, she remembered she had a family. She told me she was coming back to our home state. She said she needed to see her children. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the empty coffee mugs left by the kids. Your children are 19, 17, and 14 years old, I told her, my voice like ice. They are not the toddlers you left in a garbage bag. You cannot just walk back into their lives because you ran out of options. She started crying, playing the ultimate victim. She asked if they hated her. She asked if I had poisoned them against her. I told her I never had to say a single bad word about her because her absence did all the talking. I refused to let her just show up at our door, but I also promised I would not hide her return. I told her I would ask each of them if they wanted contact, and whatever they decided would be final. I went to Liam first. He was in the living room, cleaning his soccer cleats. I gave him the news straight. He stopped what he was doing, his jaw clenching exactly like it did when he was 14. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Tell her I do not want to see her," he said, not even looking up. "Tell her I am busy." That was it. No drama. Just pure, absolute dismissal. Hazel was even more clinical. I found her reading in her room. When I explained that her biological mother wanted to meet, Hazel just marked her page in her book and looked at me with those ancient, calculating eyes. "I do not know her," Hazel said calmly. "I have no memories of her. I do not have any questions that need answering. Please tell her no thank you." Maya was the only one who hesitated. At 19, she had carried the heaviest burden of memory. She told me she wanted to call Chloe, just once, to ask her a single question. I gave Maya the number. I did not hover. I did not ask about it. A few days later, Maya and I were washing dishes in the same kitchen sink where Hazel had first called me Mom. Maya quietly told me she had made the call. She said Chloe cried the whole time, full of excuses and apologies. "Did it help?" I asked gently. Maya shook her head. "No." I realized that knowing why she left does not change the fact that she left. I feel sorry for her, but I do not need her. I am done. I called Chloe the next morning and delivered the verdicts. I told her none of them wanted a relationship. I expected tears, but instead I heard something else. I heard the old Chloe, the vicious, entitled Chloe. She accused me of turning her own flesh and blood against her. She hung up on me. 2 weeks later, the most beautiful thing happened. I was sitting in a stressful meeting at work when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. A transfer of $500 had just cleared into my account. I frowned and opened my messages. There was a text from Maya. It read, "This is from my first few paychecks. For everything. It is not enough, but it is what I have saved. Thank you." I stepped out of the boardroom and stood in the empty hallway. Tears, real, heavy tears, streamed down my face. My 19-year-old girl, the one who had stared at a closed door waiting for her mother to return, was giving me her very first savings. It was her way of saying she saw me. She saw every sacrifice, every Saturday shift, every sleepless night. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor. While Maya was sending me her savings out of pure gratitude, Chloe was walking into a courthouse. Furious that her children had rejected her, she decided to force her way back in. She found a cheap lawyer willing to listen to her sob story. That was how, a few weeks later, I ended up standing in the parking lot, ripping open that thick manila envelope, staring at a lawsuit for parental alienation. Chloe wanted a war, and I was more than ready to give her one. I had 6 weeks to prepare for trial. I did not panic. I hired the sharpest family law attorney I could afford and handed her my absolute masterpiece. It was not a cheap 99-cent plastic folder anymore. It was a massive, indexed, color-coded binder containing 12 years of my life. Every medical bill, every school registration, every canceled check, and a meticulously logged record of the exact 3 times Chloe had attempted contact in over a decade. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom air felt heavy and sterile. I sat at the petitioner table with my lawyer. Across the aisle sat Chloe. She looked exhausted, wearing a poorly fitted suit, nervously picking at her cuticles. She had a court-appointed lawyer who was furiously skimming his notes, clearly realizing he was fighting a losing battle. Chloe lawyer opened by painting her as a tragic victim of circumstance. He claimed she suffered financial hardship and that I had used her vulnerable state to steal her children. He accused me of harboring a vendetta, deliberately poisoning their minds so they would refuse to see her. When it was our turn, my lawyer did not yell or act dramatic. She simply stood up and presented the binder. She walked the judge through a decade of unbroken devotion. She laid out the absolute lack of financial support or effort from the biological mother. But the real death blow did not come from my lawyer. It came from the kids. Because Maya was a legal adult, she chose to take the stand. She walked into that courtroom with her head held high, looking so much like the little girl who used to process the world in silence. The judge asked her directly if I had ever stopped her from speaking to her mother. Maya looked right at Chloe and spoke with chilling clarity. No. My aunt gave me the phone number when I asked for it. I called her, I listened to her, and I decided I did not want her in my life. Nobody manipulated me. I just realized that someone who can walk away from her children for 12 years does not get to demand their love when it becomes convenient. Chloe buried her face in her hands. Then, the judge read the psychological evaluation for 14-year-old Hazel. The court-appointed therapist noted that Hazel was exceptionally mature, brilliant, and completely uncooperative with the concept of forced visitation. The report concluded with a direct quote from Hazel herself. She had told the therapist she did not hate her biological mother because you cannot hate a stranger. That was it. That was the end of the war. The judge slammed his file shut. He dismissed the lawsuit in its entirety. He stated there was zero evidence of parental alienation, only a mountain of evidence of parental abandonment. The case was closed. I gathered my things and walked out of the courtroom. Chloe was waiting for me in the hallway. She looked completely broken, stripped of all her manipulative armor. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you take them from me?" I stopped and looked at the woman who used to be my sister. "I did not take them, Chloe. You left them. You put them down, and I picked them up. Now they are old enough to walk on their own, and they are choosing to walk away from you. This is exactly what you built." I turned my back on her and walked out the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The bright afternoon sun hit my face. My 3 kids were leaning against my car in the parking lot waiting for me. Maya was holding 2 coffees. Liam had his hands in his pockets. Hazel was reading a paperback book. When they saw me walking toward them, nobody asked what happened. They just looked at my face and knew. Hazel closed her book and wrapped her arms tightly around my waist, just like she did when she was a toddler. Maya squeezed my shoulder. Liam let out a massive sigh of relief. We got in the car and drove straight to our favorite rundown neighborhood pizza parlor. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours. We sat in our usual booth, laughing and fighting over the last slice of extra cheese. While I was taking a sip of my drink, my phone buzzed on the table. I looked down. It was a text message from Liam, who was sitting right across from me. I opened the message. It was a Tuesday in late October, but the text read, "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." I looked up at him. He was chewing his pizza, refusing to make eye contact, but a small, proud smile was playing on his lips. I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and looked at the 3 incredible humans sitting around me. The fortress I had built on a cold kitchen floor 12 years ago was finally complete. We were safe, and we were home.